Hello there, friends and sane persons, and welcome to another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. My name is Kyle, and Wednesday Whimsy is a short show that I do every Wednesday evening where I talk about a board game, a top 10 list, or some other game-related topic, whatever happens to be in my mind. Well, I have been playing a lot of great games lately. One that I talked about last week, Grim Coven, and then what I'm talking about next week, Recall, have started making me think about sort of games that the phenomenon I would call board game twins, right? They're more like Irish twins, I guess, right? I mean, so these are two games that are not necessarily even inspired by each other. So that's why Recall and Revive aren't going to be on the list, but games that kind of have similar mechanisms, sometimes similar themes, sometimes they just kind of get compared because they came out at about the same time, even if they were completely independently developed. So I figured there's going to be a lot of them. I'm going to talk about 5 pairs of twins this week, and then, maybe I'll revisit this in the future. I'm just going to talk about 5. Now, I've ranked them, but they're really just kind of whatever happens to be on my mind. So this is kind of a ramble, but it's a good excuse to talk about some games, and that's what we're here for, right? So my number 5 is the 2 board game twins are Nucleum and Brass. And I'll say Brass Birmingham just because that's the more popular one. Trying to find him here on Board Game Geek. All right, so basically these are 2 games that they both deal with trains, kind of, sort of. They're both very economic Euro-style games. Brass, of course, is a game where you're trying to build out your train network. First, you're building out a ferry network, and then you're going to be building out a train network, and then ultimately you're obviously trying to get points. That's the that's sort of goes without saying. But you're building up your industry, and you're trying to activate your industry tiles. And I'm trying to see if I can find a picture here. I don't know why I can't find it. Here we go. Brass Birmingham came out in 2018 by Martin Wallace and some others. I mean, the original Brass is by Martin Wallace. Let's see if we can't. I don't know why I can't show this. All right, so here is Brass Birmingham. A very popular game, very enjoyable. And you've sort of got this concept of the map, and you're really the core thing here is you're trying to empty out your industry tiles, and I think that's what makes a lot of people think about it when they think of Nucleum. Nucleum, on the other hand, a game that I really enjoy. When it came out, 2023, I was all over this thing. I obviously like Nucleum a little bit better than Brass, but in this game, you're also trying to build out a rail network, and you're trying to connect these cities. And you have these mines, and you're going to fill them up with uranium at various times, and you're trying to use that uranium, although you're not trying to use other people's. But there's sort of this concept of building up a network and building things out, and this kind of economic engine that you're driving forward to generate nuclear power. And I think that's probably why they are compared. Again, very different games, different people, developed independently, but I've never played a game of Nucleum where people haven't said, oh, this is kind of like in Brass. Now, I've played games of Brass where people haven't mentioned Nucleum, because Nucleum's obviously newer. But anyway, that is our first pair of board game twins, Brass and Nucleum. So let's go on to our next one. All right, our next one is actually one that... when it first came out, it's the best received article I've ever written on Board Game Geek. This is my favorite game, Summoner Wars, as well as a game called Mage Wars. Now, Mage Wars, so I'm going to show you old Summoner Wars for this, because really they came out at about the same time, and additionally, Mage Wars and Summoner Wars had almost the same font. And they're really very different games, right? Mage Wars is a game about sort of knowing your deck and trying to make your choices with a deck that you always have access to. And it is, of course, dueling wizards or whatever we want to call it. but it really does feel very different from Summoner Wars, which is this tactical, very tight movement game. Both of them, however, have here. I found the pictures. Why is that showing? All right. Found some pictures. Here is Mage Wars. You can see it sort of has that font. It's got this big board that you're moving around. On the other hand, Summoner Wars, we can go to here. Summoner Wars, it has a very similar font, like I mentioned, and it is a game. It's a head-to-head game of dueling wizards and such. And we're looking at real old Summoner Wars that was kind of ugly, but it's all about sort of tactical movement on this board. I really find them to be very different, but especially early on, they were very often compared. Now, I will say, Summoner Wars is still being produced. In fact, 2 new decks came out yesterday, last week, on the 18th. So, came out very recently. So this game's still being supported. Mage Wars, I think, is kind of dead. It was the game that put Arcane Wonders on the map, but it's kind of fallen off in recent years, which is unfortunate. But they are always compared. So let's move on to the next one, which is, this is probably the most common set of twins, and this is Lost Ruins of Arnak and Dune Imperium. So Lost Ruins of Arnak, and they came out, I think, within a couple months of each other. So, they were clearly in everyone's thoughts at the same time. But they both combined an interesting set of mechanisms, which was worker placement and deck building. And in both of them, you have a limited number of workers, and you're trying to place them out. Now you're doing different things. They are functionally very different games, more different than maybe even any of the others that I've talked about here. Let's look at some pictures. So here's Dune Imperium. Dune Imperium, a fantastic game. Is it showing here? It is not. So Dune Imperium, a fantastic game where you're trying to compete to be the first person to 10 points. And there's a whole lot of combat going on, and you're trying to sort of outmaneuver each other and play cards cleverly. And you are doing some deck building, and you're also using your cards to place your workers. Lost Ruins of Arnak, on the other hand, the deck building is an important aspect, and the worker placement is an important aspect, but they're less closely tied than in Dune Imperium, I think I would say. In this one, your worker placement is often going to be getting resources or getting access to certain things, which you then use to do other things, and then ultimately you'll buy cards kind of to fuel that engine. But because they came out at the same time, and they both were an interesting combination of the same sort of 2 previously uncombined mechanisms, they really got compared, and they still do today. In fact, it's very difficult to talk to somebody about one without, if they're knowledgeable about board games, without them kind of referencing the other. So there you have it. My number 2. No, sorry, my number 3. My number 2 is 2 big games, so they're going to be compared naturally just because they're so big. The first one is Oathsworn. Oathsworn Into the Deepwood is a long campaign. I mean, it's 20-some scenarios, and you are playing with exactly 4 characters. So, and if you're not playing, if you're playing by yourself or with fewer than 4 players, then you end up sort of running these simplified companion type characters, which aren't as interesting, but are easier to kind of manipulate and control. They've got slimmed down rules. Ultimately, you're going to be going through a story. There's this storybook that you're going to play through. Sometimes there's a map you're moving on. Looks like somebody painted the minis, and I can't find anything except that. And then after you come to at a certain point, the board is going to be put on the table, and you're going to start some sort of a combat, usually with. I mean, the most famous one is with this giant rat, this brood mother with all these little rats on its back. You're going to then have that combat. Win the combat, you win the scenario. So Dante Inferno is actually very similar, right? Thematically, it's very different. Dante Inferno. So Oathsworn is sort of this fantasy world. Dante Inferno is the Inferno, right? It's the obviously it sounds dumb. Dante's Inferno. Looks like there are no pictures of this. Well, there's a few. So in Dante's Inferno, you are one of Dante's friends, and you're going through this story, experiencing the various rings of hell, and then you're going to be going through a choose your own adventure in a booklet, and then once you're done, you're going to go into a combat. There's going to be a big bad that spawns, and you're then going to fight the big bad, and ideally, some things are going to be influenced by the choices that you made. So it's functionally a very similar concept to Oathsworn, which is why they get compared. Also in Dante Inferno, you have 4 characters all the time, and if you're just playing with one, you will run 3 kind of slimmed down companion characters. And they're less fun than the main characters. In fact, I would say Oathsworn's companion mechanism is a little bit better. They're more robust characters. But either way, it's a similar concept, different world, but 2 games that are huge, take up a lot of space, and have this campaign combined story and boss battler. Both great fun games. And then the last one I'm going to talk about today, this is the one that really put me onto the thought. Remember I mentioned I'm not going to do Recall. This is Grim Coven. Grim Coven I talked about on last week's Wednesday Whimsy. Let's see if I can't pull it up. Grim Coven is a boss battler as well. You are some characters, and you're hunters. It's Bloodborne type game, and you're going to be going about on this map having a boss battle, trying to defeat some sort of a big bad. There's minions and stuff as well, but where that part, kind of is what it is. But really, the part that makes it comparable to the game I find it to be its board game twin is the upgrade system. There's this concept of corruption. And as you become more corrupt, you're kind of careening toward the end of the game, but you're going to hit these thresholds and be able to upgrade certain abilities. And that is very similar to one of my favorite games of all time. I think it was number 2 on my list I just did, Cthulhu Death May Die. In Cthulhu Death May Die, you're playing through a story, and I'll say the story is a little stronger in Death May Die. But what you're going to have is a similar kind of upgrade mechanism here. Okay. So you have this madness, and as you hit these madness thresholds, eventually you're going to trigger an effect, and then you will move up on one of your ability tracks. So that's kind of a very similar concept. Also, you're battling a boss more or less in Death May Die, and it's a dark horror theme as well. So it's not that unapt a comparison. But, even though they are very different games, they're games that, in my mind, if ever I get one out, I'm going to be thinking about the other. And I'm likely to play them in sequence for that reason. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. I'm just talking about 5 pairs of board game twins. There's a lot more. If you have any that you're thinking of, go ahead and write them down. Again, for this list, I'm not talking about games that are directly inspired by each other. This is games that came out at different times or came out from different publishers or developers and maybe thematically different, but have some aspects of them, usually in their mechanisms, that make them very comparable. So they're joined, I guess they're Siamese board game twins? Well, I don't think we should say that anymore. Anyway, that's all I've got before I get myself in trouble. I'm going to end it here. I'm going to wish you safe travels, courage when you need it, and I hope to see you back again soon on another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. Bye-bye.